No,
And you feel no remorse for that?
I would kill him again.
Detroit is known for many things. The history of music through legendary Motown, it's the birthplace of countless famous people and public figures, it's home to various professional sports teams like the Detroit Lions, the Detroit Tigers, and the Detroit Red Wings, just to name a few. Unfortunately, Detroit is also where today's case took place. Today's episode is called The Freezer Confession. Before we dive into the case today, I want to warn you that some of the things that you will hear in today's case are diabolical. Crime Army also would like to give the sincere condolences to the families of Stoney Blair and Stephen Berry. March 24, 2015 was a typical day for the Detroit metropolitan area. People were in commute to work, kids were on their way to school. It seemed to be what Detroit residents knew to be a normal day. This was until an eviction crew entered Michelle Blair's apartment. Every room was filthy and littered with trash. The smell was unbearable. Mold was present in a few places of the apartment. The crew didn't want to be working in the apartment long. Shortly after the crew arrived, they got right to work. They began bringing items straight out to the dumpster. Many of the things were destroyed and beyond repair. It didn't seem like anyone wanted to be in Michelle's apartment that day. Michelle Blair and her children were nowhere to be found. However, this would soon change. The eviction crew walked in and out of the apartment carrying item after item. They never took notice of the freezer that was sitting in the living room. Finally, the freezer became one of the items that the men had to move. A couple of the men attempted to move the freezer, but they were surprised about how heavy it was. One of the men opened the freezer, took one glance, and immediately jumped back. He told the rest of the crew that there was a body in the freezer. The body that the man saw was the body of 13-year-old Stoney Blair. The crew quickly left the apartment and notified the police. The police arrived to the scene, and still there was no sign of Michelle Blair. One of the neighbors approached the police and told them exactly where Blair could be found. Blair took her kids and stayed at another neighbor's apartment while the eviction was happening. She didn't want her children seeing the process of the eviction. It turns out that when police found Michelle Blair, she was babysitting for the neighbor that she was staying with. When police located Michelle Blair, she knew exactly why they were there. Immediately, Michelle was arrested and placed into police custody. Crime Army, brace yourselves, because this case gets worse. After inspecting the deep freezer more and removing Stoney's body, the body of Michelle Blair's 9-year-old son, Stephen Berry, was also discovered. Stephen's body was wrapped up in his favorite blanket. Stoney's body was wrapped in plastic. Stoney also had a black t-shirt tied insanely tight around her neck. Believe it or not, but things get worse. Both of the bodies were taken to the morgue. Before the autopsies could be done, the bodies had to thaw for 3 days. The autopsies for Stoney and Stephen confirmed what most of us already knew. Michelle Blair is a real-life monster. The torture that these children endured is insane. Both of the children were brutally beaten and tortured for months. However, before we unpack all of that, we need to backtrack a little. In her confession to police, Michelle states that she came home one day and saw her youngest son playing with dolls. She said her son was placing the dolls in various positions and making the dolls do sexual things with each other. Michelle claims that when she questioned her son about where he learned those things, he had told her that his older brother, Stephen, was doing those things to him. Michelle Blair lost it. Now we can discuss the autopsy reports to see how bad Michelle really lost it. Stephen's autopsy report showed that he had bruising all over his body and that he died from his body having thermal issues. For weeks, Michelle would make Stephen get into the bathtub. She would dump water that was so hot on Stephen that he would get burned severely. During Michelle's confession, she stated that the water would be so hot sometimes that she could see Stephen's skin fall off when she dumped it on him. Blair told police that as her younger son shared more and more information, she became more and more angry. Michelle would punch and beat Stephen until Stephen was incapable of moving. Michelle would also tie a belt around Stephen's neck. She would grab the belt and lift Stephen in the air for long periods of time. One day, Michelle beat Stephen so bad that his body could no longer face the life-threatening injuries. Once Stephen died, Michelle wrapped his body in a blanket and she placed his body inside the deep freezer that was plugged up inside the living room. For 9 months, the other children were forced to walk past this freezer every day knowing that their brother was inside of it. Michelle told police that 9 months after she accidentally, yes, I said accidentally, killed Stephen, her youngest son told her that Stoney sexually abused him too. She was livid. She couldn't believe that Stoney didn't confess to anything as she watched her younger brother being beat to death. Michelle immediately confronted Stoney and began beating her. Michelle got a piece of wood and hit Stoney in the head with it multiple times. She made Stoney drink Windex. After weeks of beating her daughter, she tied a shirt around her neck and strangled her to death. After Stoney was officially dead, Michelle wrapped her body in plastic and she did the unthinkable. After she was done wrapping her in plastic, she made her oldest daughter pick her up and put her body in the deep freezer on top of Stephen's. This freezer sat in the living room for 2 years. Yes, I said 2 years. Her kids had to look at this thing every day, knowing that their siblings were inside of it. In an interview, Michelle was asked about her kids, and she only claims 2 of them. She does not claim Stoney or Stephen. She said that both of those kids are demons, and they never were her kids. She also said that if she had to do it all over again, she would murder them again. During this same interview, Michelle talks about her childhood experiences as well. She shares that she was molested as a little girl, and when she confronted her mother about it, her mother did nothing. This traumatic event caused pain that Michelle still holds on to till this day. She tells the interviewer that her past is the reason why she reacted the way she did with Stoney and Stephen. Michelle is currently spending the rest of her life in prison with no possibility of parole. Crime Army, today's case has been a difficult one. It really frustrates me that these kids were missing for 2 years and it didn't really raise any red flags. Michelle took all of her kids out of school and that didn't raise any red flags. This case is so frustrating, it's so sad, and it's so tragic. Let me know down below how you feel about this case and about how things turned out with this case. Hey, until next time, make sure you hit that subscribe button for upcoming episodes here on Crime Army Crime Stories.